us how to become a heretic.
Occasionally I give a talk called How to be a Successful Heretic, which I feel I've just about earned the entitlement to give because I've been able to advance the acceptance of the ideas that underlie my work in only about a decade, from a point of pretty much nil to reasonably all the way through. I like to compare myself sometimes to the trajectory that has been talked about by various people like Gandhi and Arthur C. Clarke and such like, where they say, more or less, first people ignore you and then they ridicule you and then they actively oppose you and then they say they were with you all along. I think I can feel fairly proud of the speed with which I have transitioned through those various stages. So what are my tricks? Well, I mean, there's a number of them really, but really the ultimate one is to be right. You know, to actually do your homework and really figure out whether what you say is justified before you start saying it too loudly. Then after that it's all presentation really, you know, it's being witty at the right times and having the stamina to do a lot of talks and a lot of interviews and generally be seen and be articulate, obviously. Keep working on good ways to explain yourself to people with different backgrounds and so on. Ultimately though, it all comes down to being right.
Awesome.
Okay.
So have you ever met anybody who's been a particular challenge for you to debate or to convince?
I often find people who are particularly hard to debate with, but actually the thing that makes people different in that way is not always, in fact it's often not the prejudices or biases or whatever of the people themselves. It's often their supporters. There's one particular time I remember where I was on stage doing a debate with the person who founded the environmental organisation Friends of the Earth. And for whatever reason the audience was overwhelmingly supportive of, you know, the environmentalist cause rather than supportive of technology or anything. And well, they haven't thought it through and they didn't really want to think it through, so he was sort of listening to what I had to say, albeit not taking it on board at once, but his supporters weren't listening at all, and so it was pretty difficult to get through that.
How do you actually change someone's mind? I mean, actually.
I think there's only really one answer to the question, how do you change someone's mind, on a really profound thing where they have a sort of an emotional investment in what they already think. And the answer is repeat advertising. Say something that ought logically to change their mind, and then say it again, and again, and again, for as long as it takes. And so that's really a large part of why I take the trouble to do so much media. Because ultimately I'm saying exactly the same thing now as I was saying 10 years ago when I started getting into the media. And you know, I'm probably saying it better now in certain, tailored better for certain audiences and such like. You know, I obviously do try to get better at these things. But ultimately it's all about just helping people to, well, making it difficult for people to think that I've just gone away. You know, the more they hear the same thing and the more they don't hear good arguments to the contrary, the more they get ground down and eventually decide that what I'm saying might actually be true. And of course there's a lot of peer pressure involved as well. The more people get convinced, the easier it is for them.
So what actually first got you interested in working on the technology to develop better longevity?
Ah, nice easy question. Okay, so the thing that got me into this field was very simple. I discovered that hardly anybody else was in it. I'd spent my entire life until the age of, I'm going to say, 29, 30, feeling that it was completely obvious that aging was the world's biggest problem, that it was, first of all, extremely bad for a lot of people and kill people and cause a lot of suffering and so on, and secondly, that it was potentially amenable to medical intervention. Both of these things were completely obvious to me. So obvious that I still really can't quite understand why they're not obvious to everybody. So it was a complete revelation to discover through my wife, whom I married when I was 26, that actually most biologists don't think that way. She's a biologist, and she has been all her life, since, you know, not long before, since around the time I was born actually. She's a lot older than me. Anyway, so yeah, until that time I'd always presumed that most biologists were working on this, or at least a lot of them were, and that, you know, you didn't see much progress, but hey, okay, it's a hard problem. And nobody talked about it, but, you know, nobody does talk about obvious things, like, you know, the colour of the sky or whatever. So I never really gave it a second thought myself. I thought, you know, it's not my problem. But when I started to discover that actually most biologists regard aging as not very interesting and not very important, I realised that there was nothing for it. I had to switch fields. I was previously working as a computer scientist in artificial intelligence research for very much the same reason as I'm working in aging now, namely humanitarian reasons. I wanted to make people's lives better by stopping them from having to do all these tedious things like going down mines and serving hamburgers and such like. But I very rapidly understood that this was an even more important problem, because not much point in having all these machines to make your life easier if you're already dead, really.
Exactly. So if you have any advice for people trying to choose a career which is meaningful or something that will change the world in a better way, how would you advise them to get started and to make a choice?
People often ask me, how can I do the same sort of thing? How can I really make a difference to the world? And of course, mostly I get asked, how can I get into the field of longevity and the combating of aging? But I like your question as being more general about how one make a difference into the world overall. There's only a limited extent to which I can answer the question. I can say that, you know, you need to look for how to play to your strengths, how to do what you're in a position to do or what you're particularly good at doing, but that's pretty obvious. Ultimately, beyond that, I haven't got a very useful answer, because for me, an enormous proportion of it was luck. You know, I just happened to meet this woman who was a very articulate biologist and who was able to help me understand that this was not something the biologists cared about. I happened before that to get into research in artificial intelligence, again in a completely fortuitous way that allowed me to understand that I was good at working at hard problems and that not many other people were. You know, there's all manner of bits of luck that I've had that have been, the fact of being able to switch careers, you know, most people just couldn't do that, like overnight the way I did. I just happened to have a job at that time where I was able to do a lot in my spare time, so I was able to do that. Most people couldn't do that. So I have to honestly, you know, hold my hand up and say I can't really say what most people should do to make the same sort of level of difference to the world that I'm making, because so much of it is about luck. What I can say though is that you don't have to make the amount of difference that I'm making. If there's a particular crusade, a particular topic that really drives you, get involved in it and we'll figure out how to, the people who are already involved in it will figure out how to make the best use of you.